afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Welcome to this month's ID Update. Heidi, it's been a month. It's
been a
busy month.
It has been a busy month. How have you been?
Yeah, good. It's all in theory. Everyone goes, "Oh, isn't it nice how it slows down over the summer?" And it's like,
I don't know what that
means.
No.
What are you talking about? So it's certainly on our side of things, it's ramping up for all the events later in the year. What about yourself, Heidi? What have you been up to?
Oh, just back to school, back to soccer, momming, that kind of thing.
All the fun stuff, right? That's fantastic. Well, we've kind of got a really good show, I think, today. I think we've got some interesting topics to discuss. I say that I can take none of the credit for that. I kind of about 20 minutes ago went, I've kind of, messed up. So Heidi has done a lot of the heavy lifting for today's show. But before we get into any of that, let me roll the intro and then we'll be back as we dive into our first topics. Do get involved in the chat. If there's things you want us to discuss, let us know. They're always the most interesting conversations. But without further ado, play the theme tune. It's about as smooth as that's ever gone.
Yeah, that was impressive.
There we go.
Maybe there is something to things slowing down.
Absolutely. So, shall we? Where shall we start? There's been a few good topics for us to get into. Heidi, do you want to kick us off with some of yours?
Let's start with the headlines. Actually, let's start with the news stories and the research stories of what we have to say about those.
Exciting stuff.
There? Pass it right back over to you.
That's cool. So, if you're rapidly scrolling, if you are maybe start with that music. That music is phenomenal. You gotta have some exciting music. So, I want to talk a little bit about research, specifically about what we do with it in L&D. Those of you who have heard from me before will probably be bored of me saying we should be more evidence informed, we should read more research, we should utilize this stuff to inform our actions. Not dictate, just inform. But recently, and I'm going to pick on the AI ones because they're the ones that get blown up out of proportion at the moment, we seem to have got a little bit lost, I think, around the correct use of research. And there's kind of 2 points to this. One is the idea that a single research paper does not make like an absolute fact. Like, it's really important to bear in mind that just because it comes out and it's got an MIT badge on it does not mean that it's full of things that are absolutely true. The second thing, and actually there's going to be a third thing, you can tell I'm kind of rolling with this. The second thing is that you have to actually read the research. The title and or the headlines you've seen on someone else's post or in the media will not be an accurate representation of this. And third, you've got to really think about whether or not research, just because it's research, is accurate. Like, there's some stuff that just doesn't ring true about some of these things. And I'm going to pick on two pieces of recent research specifically. The first, which everyone is probably very familiar with, is the research out of MIT that got sort of dubbed the AI brain rot study. In and of itself, the fact that it was very quickly adopted an emotive title should probably set off alarm bells. But then you look at the fact that the term brain rot doesn't appear in the research. It was added in the media coverage afterwards.
Yeah.
The researchers talk about cognitive debt, which has a very specific definition, is important to understand, etc., but it is not brain rot. And that's a dangerous situation there, where we're now using research that says one thing to add weight to a claim that has no research behind it. That's really, really risky. And when you read that paper, it makes very, very clear two things. One, there are loads of issues with it. Some that are stated, there's a page and a half of like, look, these results are so-so in the following ways. Here are the limitations of the study. Here are the things we would change if we were to do this again. But there are also a lot of issues around sample size. It's a very small sample size. When you look at the data and then you look at the conclusions, there are some jumps there, some acknowledged and some not acknowledged as clearly as you might hope they were. It's also not peer-reviewed. So we're looking at a single study with holes in it, some acknowledged, some not, small sample size, not peer-reviewed. And yet, the idea AI will rot your brain has gone through LinkedIn, the internet, and conferences as well, like wildfire, because it's got a little MIT research stamp on it.
It does, yeah.
And and this is the dangerous thing, right? I don't want to be like, clearly, as an industry, we're too stupid to look at research. We should just stay in a little box and just focus on instructional design stuff. But that we do, if we're going to say, oh, we're research informed, if we're going to try and utilize this kind of stuff, we do take on a responsibility to use it honestly and accurately. And if we don't have the skills to do that, either find someone who does and ask them to translate for us. That's my tip. Find a smart person, or upskill ourselves. Those are our two options. We can't just, for instance, chuck it into ChatGPT and say, hey, tell me about this research. Because then you're taking something, I want to use research for its accuracy and its in-depth understanding of a topic, and then we just chuck it into an LLM and ask it to summarize for us. Kind of, misses the point somewhat. And then more recently, also out of MIT, I've got nothing against MIT, by the way. They just happen to be producing these studies that everyone loves to kind of jump on because they're interesting. And I would never argue these things are not interesting and that we shouldn't read them. But they recently published the one that you've probably already heard about, that 95% of all AI pilots in corporate situations fail. I mean, just that headline in its own kind of sounds like there's a term, bullshit. That's what it sounds like. A nice round number and a very high round number as well. Great headline, though. If you're selling your services as someone, don't be part of the 95%. Bring me in as a consultant and I'll make sure your pilot succeeds. Phenomenal line, which is why it's got so popular so quick, right? But when you read that paper, you realize there is a vast amount of nuance in what they're saying. And they also go to great lengths to outline the fact that, once again, single paper, not peer reviewed, etc., but that they have a very, very, very narrow definition of what successful looks like. They also acknowledge this is based on publicly available information. So not only to be successful in their eyes, you have to have succeeded and then publicly stated that you succeeded. So everyone that just quietly went, let's bring in a tool, maybe we talk about that publicly, but we don't talk about what the insides of the business publicly, which is quite common, let's be honest, failed. They're saying that, they're not hiding that fact. That is part of their methodology. It's a flaw in the methodology, in my view. A limitation, I think, is the official term. But it kind of invalidates any claim we have that 95% failed. It just means that there's a large number where we don't know what happened.
Yeah.
That's a less scrabby headline, though. But that nuance isn't there in anyone's conversation right now, and that worries me. Those are the two that worry me. The 95% one has other issues. I published an article on this at the start of the week because I got in a really bad mood about it when someone quoted it to me while trying to sell their services. But the biggest thing here actually isn't my annoyance with the vendor space, because vendors we're going to vend. That's what we do. We grab stuff, we try and twist it as best we can without lying most of the time. In my case, I like to think that at Evolve we don't lie at all. But I'm not going to make that claim for other organizations. You can judge each one for yourself. But if we are going to be more evidence informed, and I'll hand this over to Heidi now because I know I've gone for a little while on this, we have to actually engage with this stuff. It can't be a surface level of grab the headline, write a LinkedIn post. decide that's how we need to change how we work. We need to actually read this stuff. We need to take the time to understand it. We need to question it. We need to read broadly. We need to take one study and then another and use them as points of comparison and contrast to shape and educate our decisions, not dictate them. And unfortunately, I see that practice getting quieter and quieter right as these big headlines are coming in, which are very exciting, very grabby. I get their allure, if you will. But in the long term, they will hurt us if we fall back on these things. Because at some point, someone who really knows their stuff is going to come along and say, you're wrong, here's why you're wrong, and now you look a bit silly. And as an industry, we've done this before. Remember when there were going to be no desktop computers in a few years and everyone was going to be on mobile and the whole industry ran down that road right into the brick wall of what the hell are you talking about? There was research papers then as well with those nice grabby headlines. We did exactly the same thing. We risk doing the same thing with AI and everything else going on now if we don't get smart about this now. If we leave it too long, we will be in the thrall of vendors who are willing to utilize these kinds of headlines against us ultimately. And I will now shut up and hand back to Heidi because I've gone for quite a while.
That's good. I've just been taking notes, but I was not able to successfully sneakily grab your article from earlier this week. So you may want to share that URL in the chat because I did not grab it. So I think what's interesting is my perspective, having my PhD and having gone through, the stats and the qual and the quantitative classes and doing the ethics training that we have to do as PhD students, where it's kind of like a Hippocratic oath, but for academics, where we say that we will be, accurate and reliable and all of the other good things with our research. But then I see people on social media who have PhDs every day who clearly either didn't have to take that same ethics training or they just don't give a shit that they had to take it. Because one of the things that I've seen with the articles that you've specifically called out is every time they're shared on LinkedIn and social media, they are accompanied by AI generated images of brain scans that are incredibly misleading, that make it seem like they're from the study. But when you look at the actual study, and I skimmed the pages because a PhD had posted the study with brain scan photos, and I said, surely these cannot be from the study. And I skimmed through all 200 pages of the stinking study just to find that no, they were not. And if you are a PhD and you are publishing somebody else's work with images that you've created that are supposed to be, that imply that they're part of that research, you are diluting that other person's research, period, point blank. There's no world in which sharing research in that way is not diluting that author's research. So at the best, it's unethical. At the worst, it dilutes their research and is spreading misinformation, right? And is dangerous. It reminds me a lot of, I grew up during the time where Marilyn Manson was blamed for school shootings in the US. I don't know, Tom, if you are privy to that global bit of news, but back when the Columbine shooting happened when I was in middle school, everyone blamed Marilyn Manson and music and violent video games like Grand Theft Auto for those incidents. They didn't blame their home situation. They didn't blame the lack of mental health care in the United States. They didn't blame anything that plausible, rational people would blame. They blamed Marilyn Manson and Grand Theft Auto. Well, both still exist and both have, it's obviously been proven that has nothing to do with it, right? And specifically with the 95% study, I would be interested in how many regular businesses would fail according to their criteria, right? Because I'm interested in the criteria, and I haven't read the study myself, but I'd be interested in how many businesses they would consider a failure who aren't using AI, just regular. I would love to see a comparison of that, like this, because I mean, think about the different clients that you've worked for, the different companies that you've worked for over the years. Some of them, you work there for years and you go, I don't know how this business is making any money. I don't know how they're successful, because everybody I work with is a dingbat and doesn't know what's going on here, right? And then you see like senior leadership are on PIPs and this manager over here is getting moved somewhere else. And like you see from the inside, the culture that's just crumbling. But on the outside, they're, oh, we won one of Cleveland's top workplaces to work for in the Plain Dealer, you know, and meanwhile, you know that they just canned somebody who's worked there 19 years. Not that I'm talking about anyone in particular. But, you know, yeah, I think that's why it's really important. Like you said, I'm going to throw something in the chat here too. I wrote a blog article on how to read an academic paper, because I realized and recognized that not everybody has had the training that I've had through 2 graduate degree programs and a PhD program to be able to really like pick through it and see, is this a good study? Is this, you know, legitimate? Is this like, does this represent a large number of people? Is it repeatable? You know, all those things. And I've tried to break it down in a really easy way so that even if you're not somebody who reads scholarly journal articles for fun like me, you could still get something useful out of it.
Brilliant. I mean, I think that's kind of that topic as much as I think we're probably sort of ready to talk about it. But I think it's an interesting place to start, because that's the kind of research that comes external to our industry. But we have like a slightly odd internal relationship as well. Like I see L&D is like the land of the white paper at certain times of year. Generally, when people start thinking about their annual budgets, every LMS known to man suddenly has an insight-packed white paper to share with you. And some of them, to be fair, are genuinely interesting and insightful and are not just, do you know what the best LMS is? Take a guess. You're wrong. It's us. Who would have known? Yeah, many of them are. It's a bit like the blog articles where you're like, oh, it's a comparison of everyone working in our space. Let me guess, your tool's the best? Of course our tool's the best. We've just changed the criteria to make sure that we're the best. So, yeah, but then there are some that are more questionable, some that are great, some that are very insightful, some that are just waffle. And then we have quite this interesting group of kind of quasi independent result sort of white papers and research things that everyone has something there, an angle they're taking, an interest they particularly have, something, you know, in the same way like when I ended up not publishing it because I didn't think it was worth it, and in the AI one that I did, my interest there was straight from, I don't think any of this stuff is actually getting done. That was my kind of angle of, look, I'm asking questions to kind of go, but really, are you actually doing this, or are you just going, we use ChatGPT, kind of, maybe, perhaps. You know, everyone has some kind of angle behind what they're doing. And I know, Heidi, there's a couple that you kind of wanted to chat about that are coming out or that have come out recently. Yeah,
that have just come out. And it's funny that you mentioned that angle, because I know for a fact that was part of Tim Slade's inspiration for his 2025 State of the Industry report was, you know, seeing all this stuff on social media, but meanwhile meeting with teams and meeting with people on teams and going, but they're not really doing all this stuff that everybody is, you know, making frameworks on and writing new books on and, you know, doing this, that, and the other. He's like, they're not really doing that, but it's not enough for him to say it, right? And just say, nobody's really doing this. So he's like, let me show people, right? So one of the things that I found really interesting about Tim's report, a lot of it is geared towards newer instructional designers, right? So there's a lot about portfolios and, what hiring managers are looking at portfolio wise, but there's also a section on measurement and effectiveness, which we happen to be talking about today. And it talks about deliverables. How does your team measure the effectiveness of its learning and development programs? And it talks about the ways that they measure that, right? And so 72% say that they use some sort of course survey. 62% say that they use some sort of knowledge assessment. 42% say they use some sort of performance assessment. And then 30% said they measure it looking at business results, right? And I find that data matches nicely with another report that just recently came out called the ROI Shift from iSpring. And I was somebody who provided some expert analysis of that white paper. So full transparency. Oh, I also provided expert analysis for Tim's report as well. But that's because I read both ahead of time and determined that both were solid research and said, yes, of course, I'll provide some comments on this, which is lovely to be able to do. But the iSpring ROI Shift asked, does your company or organization evaluate the ROI or business impact of its L&D programs? And only 30% said that they did. Another 30% said that they looked at basic measures. And then another, I'm sorry, I'm very bad at math, 40% said that they didn't measure ROI at all, which is really interesting because then the data goes on to share that 78% of people are confident, either somewhat or very confident, that their L&D programs contribute to business goals. So if you're confident that the L&D programs contribute to business goals, and further, another statistic shows that 61%, that's rounded, 61% of teams or of respondents say that they have either already had to justify or anticipate having to justify their L&D budget using ROI. So if we think that we're contributing to these business goals and we are having to prove our L&D budget is supported by those business goals and is justified by those business goals, then why are we not measuring that? Tom, tell me the answer. No,
wild levels of incompetence that you wouldn't believe could exist in any other department in the business. I mean, I'm sure it's something else. No. This is the forever question, though, right? Because there are tons of things, and I think this is a good example of stuff where we know very well what we should be doing, like in most areas of practice. We are not waiting really for great big breakthroughs and sudden new pieces of information that no one's ever suggested before. A lot of it is just, can people be bothered to work harder? Or because expectations are generally quite low in our space, because historically we have not been a wonderfully effective business function, let's be entirely honest, we kind of get away with it in a way, again, that other functions would not really, be able to get away with and haven't been able to get away with. I think I want to be like, no, there's this thing and this unlocks all these things. But I think a lot of this is just the human inertia, for want of a better term. Like, we're comfortable, we're safe. Most businesses, regardless of what we say, still are not demanding enough of their L&D function in my mind. Certainly with the teams that I work with, I quite often say, like, and the business is okay with what you're doing. And they're like, yes, but that concerns us because they shouldn't be okay with this being what we do, where the team has changed over time and maybe new ideas have come in. So yeah, I would love it to be something else, but I have a horrible suspicion that's where my answer lies.
Well, and the ROI shift report also mentions that it asked what the challenges are with measuring the business impact. It's a little bit different than what I've heard anecdotally. Like anecdotally, a lot of the times when I post about it on LinkedIn, the pushback that I get is, but our business doesn't care, right? They don't care. They're not asking for anything more. So why would we give them anything more, right? But the biggest challenge that the respondents mentioned for not being able to measure is isolating impact from other variables. And 68% of people said that this was their problem, was that they couldn't isolate it from other variables. Tom, you're shaking your head. Explain.
See my previous comments about wild levels of incompetence. No, just fundamental misunderstandings of what we're trying to demonstrate. Like I'll let you run with this, Heidi. You're better placed to go into it than me. But yeah, this is what I'm talking about, where incompetence is probably an unfair term for it. But I think there is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're supposed to be doing. I think the use of the term ROI can sometimes contribute to that, because ROI suggests that we're going to get to we have made X amount of money for the business. And that is a brave statement whenever someone's willing to say it in L&D. We should stop being a cost center. We are a cost center. We cost money to run, but the idea is that we contribute to greater progress in some other way. I think that conversation sometimes muddies the understanding here. But I'll shut up and let you run with that, Heidi. But yeah, I do think that's a wonderful example of just fundamentally missing the point.
Yeah, I think also it shows that I've thought this for a really long time, that we think about data in the wrong way, right? I think that people think of data, they think of reports and spreadsheets and dashboards, and anecdotal data can be really, really powerful for L&D when it's coupled with other valuable data sources, right? So if let's use I always use like leadership development as an example, because I think it's one where people miss the mark entirely, right? Let's say you are asking for a leadership development program because, I always say most of the managers at your work are a-holes. And people go, oh, well, how do you know that most of the people you work with are jerks? Okay, well, we have exit interviews from people quitting the company because we're doing such a poor job. We've got these performance reports. We do 360 performance reviews where we have people grade their bosses and grade their team members. And we have really, really bad reviews of our managers. And we also have really bad employee. When we do our annual employee survey, they always say rate leadership so low, right? Those are measures, right? Those are things that you can measure right now, today, and then after you have a leadership development program. But instead, everybody says, well, we'll do a survey. Do you like it, right? I'm going to tell you right now that if all your leaders are assholes and you run a good, actual, solid leadership development program that is there to change behavior, they're not going to like it. Not at first. They're going to be very uncomfortable because they're going to have to do a lot of self-reflection. They're going to have to do a lot of growing, and they may not have a net positive in the short term from that experience. So that's one case where, we want them to not hate it and not think it's grueling to be there, but it's one of those where change may make people uncomfortable, and whether or not they liked it may not be our best metric. Let's look at those performance things. Let's look at that employee data. Let's look at that retention. And no, maybe we can't prove that we alone affected retention for our employees, but if we are working together and HR is doing initiatives too in the hiring process to hire people that are a better cultural fit for what they want, we can say, look at all of these data points we have. We have the employee surveys. We have the exit interview data. We also have this data that's comparing managers now and in the future after they go through this program. It makes a pretty compelling story. And you didn't have to do any spreadsheets. You didn't have to do any specific things. You just have to look at where data is and not think of it as like these metric numbers that come out of a certain system,
Absolutely. We've got tons of good stuff coming up in the chat as well that we should dive into here. Got some great questions and great points on this. But I think you are exactly right. I think some of these are actually going to touch on that. So we've got Lauren. Nice to have you with us, Lauren. How do they design the programs with built-in measures, not just a short in the dark analysis afterwards? Answers: most don't know how to. Yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly it. There's this idea that, you do the thing and then you measure. And I'm not even, but I've been talking about it for a while. A lot of other people have. Lauren has. You have idea about this idea of it doesn't end. This is a constant job. This L&D's job is not intervention based. It's holistic across the entire organization at every level, in every department, at all times. It's why, like, at the minute, I'm playing with the idea of, do I like the idea of needs analysis anymore? Because the idea of doing a needs analysis is terrifying. Every minute of every day, every experience we have in an organization should be the forming of an ongoing understanding of the organizational needs. Needs analysis started when you started in the company, and it will finish on the day you leave the company, because you should be learning what's going on in the organization every single day. Are you performing? Is that team performing? Is the organization performing? If at any given day you're like, organizationally speaking, are we hitting our targets for this year, and you don't know the answer, and you work in an L&D department, you are not doing your job well. That probably sounds quite harsh, but it's true. And it took me a long time to realize this, that all of that stuff was my responsibility. Whether I currently had a project relating to that team or not, their performance was my business, because that's what I was hired to be worried about. That's what I was hired to do. And I think that a lot of the measurement issue actually is not measurement specific. It comes back to what we view our role as in the business. Our role is not, that particular bit of the sales function has asked us to train them to improve their performance. So we measure their current performance, we train them, we measure their post-performance, we go, hey, we're an effective team. Well, no, because you just worked on a subset of people within the business and created a small change. Woohoo. Right. That's not what the business needs. The business needs that at scale, at all times, on an ongoing basis, and before the manager comes to you going, these people are going to be fired if they don't perform better next quarter.
Right.
We talk about, we need to be more proactive. We need to not be an order taker. We can't be those things without always be looking, always be measuring. And going back to your point about data, I think, who was it? Emma Sharp in the chat shared a phenomenal example of observation. Observation is the gold standard of data when it comes to measuring our effectiveness, in my view. It's all very well to have a spreadsheet in your LMS going, they all know their stuff. And it's all very well to have even a spreadsheet of numbers saying the company hit its numbers. That's good. But what happened in between is only going to be sort of visible through observation. That's manager observation, peer observation, direct observation from us. The reason we have to be constantly scanning the workplace, in part, is to identify needs. In part, it's to measure progress. We can do both at the same time. We have two eyes. You can separate them, set them different tasks. Probably not, but it's a nice idea. Yeah.
Just picturing a chameleon.
There you go. This is it. This is effectively what we need to be in L&D. But that is why, to my mind, it's not, there's not a measurement phase, I don't think. There's not you put this in here and that in there. It's not as simple as, and now we measure our effectiveness. That's an ongoing thing. And it's why I got so frustrated when you were saying about separating the variables. I just think that's fundamentally misunderstanding. We should be contributing to all performance in the business. So if performance is improving over time, we should be able to confidently say we are part of that improvement. We don't need to be able to say we increased sales by £3 million last year. For one thing, if you ever make that claim, you're going to get laughed out of the room. Because someone's going to go, really? Prove it. And you're going to go, as I heard from an award applicant a few years ago, what else could it be? It's like, that's the actual argument. That because you don't know what else it could be, it must be your efforts. You know, and part of this is like a fundamental lack of understanding like statistics and numbers and blah, blah, blah. But part of it is also just putting together a logical argument. Can you actually say with any real confidence and proof that was us? And if not, that's fine, but don't claim it. Claim we contributed to. And then you can start measuring correlation and getting fancy and all that kind of thing. But just contributing is enough. Every other function does. IT doesn't say this was all us when sales go up, but they flipping contributed to it by making sure the website was up and that systems worked and blah, 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 blah. They don't worry about, are we being seen as a cost center? Are we showing, do we have a seat at the table? No, IT just goes, does everything work? Yes, you're very, very welcome.
Right.
we should be putting ourselves in that same support function seat, in my view. That in my view is I could be completely wrong, but I don't think I am. So.
Well, yeah, and I think I always talk about triangulation of data. And when I talk about it in like practical L&D terms, it means something a tiny bit different than what it means in actual research. And I realize that, and I'm just acknowledging that in case anybody does know that. But for L&D, I say that you should basically have 3 data points that you're pulling from for every project that you're working on that you're trying to show that ROI, right? And that it's those 3 data points that come from different areas coming together that paint the picture of your contribution, right? In a way that it doesn't matter if it's a dollar value. It doesn't matter if you're the only one who impacted it or not. If you, like using that leadership development example again, if you show, better performance data, better employee survey data, and exit interview data, and on top of that, people just feel when you go and talk to random leaders in the organization, they just feel the vibe shift, right? They felt that you get some of that, lovely qualitative data from the stakeholders that you've been working with to put in there too. And not only do we have these quantitative measures, but, VP Bob, who's the one who ordered this training, has said it's a great success. Right? Like people who are in leadership positions, their word has value in organizations. And I think people sometimes forget that your stakeholder, their word has value. Their word has quantifiable value for your company. And when you go, oh, well, it's fine, we'll just do another survey and a 10-question multiple choice quiz that makes sure that they memorize the 3 facts that we threw in here, you're not valuing their word, right? You're not taking that into consideration as a valued source. So yeah, I think, somebody said in the comments that L&D is also about staff retention, career progression, et cetera. And that's really true. And for its own self as well, right? You can't just be serving everybody else in the organization and leave your poor L&D team unskilled and ignored,
And I think that point actually sort of leads to what Christina says there actually. Do you think L&D roles are considered even by L&Ders, which is a phenomenal term, I've not seen that before, fantastic, as basic and more focused on like creating an e-learning course, get it out there, make people take it, rather than being more robust and taking on deeper business pieces, and that should require proof and evidence and bringing value? I think yes, and part of that is just us choosing that.
Yeah.
Which I know is quite arrowing and self-blamey as an industry, but I do think we have, well, how if we were to look at what we've chosen to develop in each of ourselves that are here today over the last 6 months, how much of it is holistic business practice and how much of it is the correct design of buttons in e-learning, or some kind of content or intervention related focus. I think, in my experience, a lot of effort is put into those and not enough into that holistic business practice.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I love what Emma has said, that only if you let them does it become that, right? And there's another piece in Tim's State of the Industry report that kind of supports what Christina's saying, where, let me see if I can find it. Which of the following types of training and learning materials does your team create and deliver? Now, this isn't just one, right? This is a choose all that apply, but 92% of teams reported that they create asynchronous e-learning. The next highest is 78% of teams say that they create job aids. Then we jump down to 69% of respondents say they make how-to videos. 69% say that they do ILT in person. 69% say they do virtual ILT. And then 67% say they also create knowledge-based materials. But that cliff from that 92 down to that 69% means that math is so hard for me. What is that? 23%. There's a 23% difference there, that a quarter of teams are just doing that e-learning, right? Which is probably why they, I think there's a little of cart before the horse, chicken egg, that we can't really identify here. Is it that we say, okay, we're fine with only doing this, only doing the basics and putting it out? Or is it that companies have demanded that we only do that because they've seen L&D people waste too much time? And I think one thing that we've really done to hurt ourselves is whenever I mention how much speed and efficiency L&D teams need to have now, people always bring up the Chapman Alliance data from 2010 to me. That it takes 140 hours to create 1 hour of highly interactive e-learning. And I tell those people that if I cannot use a 2010 study in my PhD research, that you cannot use it in conversation with me. And two, that's 15-year-old data. If your team is still that slow and you're not doing something like you're not creating something in Unity, for instance, then it should take you significantly less than that.
And I mean, no Unity developer worth their salt is spending that amount of time on something anyway. That's like, people have made video games that have made millions in less time.
Sure.
That should tell us a lot, But yeah, I mean, there is something, though, I think, in how we tend to think, because I observe like this certain pace of how a lot of teams progress, right? They start off with, we train everyone face to face. Then maybe they go into the kind of coaching, mentoring space to try and alleviate some classroom time. Then they'll jump to short, sharp classrooms, so like 15-minute lunch and learns or whatever it might be. And then they'll jump to e-learning. That will be the progression. So we're going to go digital. So we've bought Articulate and an LMS, and now we're going to do e-learning. So now we offer in-person and this and that, and then they'll add ILT. Weirdly, one of the last things they'll add are job aids and knowledge bases and things like this. Like, where did that become the standard progression? That we have to go from one side to the other side to find our way back to the middle. Like, I could understand it really, but before I got into the industry, like 20 years ago, I could get that would be the swing. Today, all the research, everyone knows that the kind of the Goldilocks zone is the middle. It's the blend. It's these, just-in-time interventions with job aids and supports and knowledge bases and blah, blah, blah. And yet still, most organizations that I observe, and it is anecdotal, it is just my observation here, still go through the classroom, shorter classroom, manager-based intervention, e-learning, and then back to the middle. It's bizarre that we just don't seem to be collectively learning this stuff. We all seem to be intent on learning it individually in every business, wasting everyone's time. everyone's money and continuing to kind of run down the reputation of what it is that we do in the process.
Well, I think that also has something to do with the fact that our major evaluation models, and this is part of the reason why I created my own evaluation framework for L&D, that I'm still working on, is that we don't have viable measurements for things like job aids or knowledge-based articles, right? Like, we don't include those in our evaluation frameworks. We don't, those aren't part of level 1 being attendance or going to the training program. You don't go to a job aid. You know what I mean? So like, I think we make people think that those aren't viable, valuable parts of learning, when you can absolutely measure the effectiveness of a job aid, right? You can absolutely measure the effectiveness of a knowledge base, right? Especially if you have something like Google Analytics. You can measure page views. You can measure for a job aid. What is it meant to do? Is it meant to reduce shipping errors? Well, I don't know. Count your freaking shipping errors before and after. Is the job aid meant to reduce the number of accidents on the factory floor? Count the accidents. Like, it's, I get so frustrated and baffled when we don't measure, when we have a learning outcome from the very beginning, whether it's we're making a 1-pager in Canva or a 6-month program. We have that outcome, the overall goal. This is here's what we want to see. Here's the change we want to see. And then we don't measure that change. Like, what are we doing? It's like, I think we have this problem that's just human, right? Where if you want to lose weight and you want to look sexy and whatever, like, what you have to do. But yet still, and I'm speaking for my own self, still, I'm buying, chocolate covered Nutter Butter cookies and eating them on the weekend instead of going to the gym and lifting, right? And, everybody has their own version of that, and everybody has their own, but we know what we need to do. And we're very good as humans at just like not doing it, going, no, it's too much work. Right. And I think that that's really where people get with the evaluation, is they spend so much time on the other parts of the process. They spend so much time spinning their wheels, going back and forth with SMEs and stakeholders, because they haven't set kind of this structure from the beginning. Like, if you have a good outcome and objectives from the beginning and you have good measures, you don't have the scoping problems that you used to. Like, I promise you don't have the scoping, because you can always go, well, what about the outcome here? Let's focus back on the outcome. And you can refocus your SMEs and stakeholders, because that's something that you all agreed to at the very beginning. The measure is clear, right? So I think what Christina said too about the mindset, teaching your organization, what you have to do when you teach and sell this to your organization is show them how much more efficient it is for the business to measure the things that the business actually cares about, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've yet to meet a senior leadership team that is not happy for an L&D team that wants to align itself more with the business and wants less to have its own little fiefdom.
Yeah.
But I don't really get what the argument is against it at this point, because all the kind of fantasy things that get thrown out there around, oh, well, people don't want us operating in that space, I don't have permission to. It's like they kind of disappear and you go, okay, well, have you asked them? No. Okay, let's ask them. And then sure enough, they're like, yeah, we would love a more effective L&D department. Thanks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't get me wrong. I am sure there is some wild edge case where some
there are
CEO would have been, no, stay in your corner, blah, 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 blah. But I would humbly suggest they are very rare, and that very few of us will run into that particular blocker, and that actually it sits much more with us, either in terms of not thinking we can or being afraid to do it, because we are much more likely to fall over on our faces publicly in the business when we work holistically.
Yeah.
And so we almost have to set ourselves up as that is going to happen, and that's okay, because that's what's supposed to happen.
Right.
And start working better and in a more in a more kind of, I'm not going to use the A word, work in a more incremental fashion.
Yes.
Cool. Anything else on those? Oh, have we dropped links to both those
yes.
reports in
They were a bit scattered, but yes, I did.
Amazing. So do go and read both of those, because I have not got round to either one of them yet, much to my shame. So I've been too busy trying to understand MIT research and having to, as I was saying, Heidi, my trick is find a smart person and ask them to read it to you using much smaller words.
There you go.
And get a little pen out to explain the charts of data, which took far longer than I think they thought it was going to, and they found it quickly. Anything else you want to talk about today?
I'll just add one more thing, because it made me. What's actually a good thing to do, which may seem a little antithetical, but ChatGPT is pretty good at like breaking down a research article. I've had a couple where I was reading, I'm like, oh, problem 1, problem 2, problem 3. And then I'm like, okay, this research is too problematic. So I feed it through ChatGPT and I say, point out every weakness in this research article for me. And you have to do it skeptically, right? You have to approach it skeptically, because otherwise ChatGPT's inclination is to want to make you happy and to tell you all the lovely things. So if you come at it from a skeptical point of view and say tear this baby apart, it will do a really, really good job of talking about how the methodology and the results and ask it to explain why in layman's terms those are problems, and it will do a really good job.
Interesting. I think what I might do a little bit of an experiment. I might, based on what I've already got on those, which I might put those same reports through and see how it does. In the past, I've been slightly concerned, but it has been a while. I was put off early doors with ChatGPT and research because it just kind of added in bits.
Sure. Yeah. That's why you have to give it something that already exists and then have it break it down and synthesize it. Not, is there other research that supports this? Because then it's going to fabricate numbers. You know what I mean? So you just have to, approach it. I shall take a look. We've got some great comments coming in as well. Maria, sometimes I wonder if there can be a fear on the side of the ID and L&D specialists. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's been the case for a long time. If I'm honest, I think we were having conversations about that 6-7 years ago at conferences, about how we needed to, be braver and embrace these new areas, and that it was just fear holding us back. And we still seem to be quite scared, would be my observation. Not universally, but I think there is a nervousness, I think, right? If we aren't being challenged to do it, why put ourselves at risk? Why fail publicly when you don't have to, I guess, would be the counter argument. I think the biggest argument, Heidi, I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts on this as well, but my biggest argument for it would be, if we don't fail now by choice and learn from it, then we're going to get pushed later and we're going to fail and not get a chance to recover. Which is where there have been very high profile the last few years cases of this company got rid of a huge chunk of its L&D team. Isn't that terrible? And actually then the stories suddenly come out of actually maybe that L&D team was kind of, bad. Because again, I love our space. I love the people in our space. Lots of people that I've met are awesome. But statistically speaking, some of us are not very good at our jobs. That's just true. There's a curve in every industry, right? And I'm sure in various elements of what I do, I fall somewhere low on the curve. I'm not saying this is about you. This is about me just as much as anyone else. There are reasons why I went, research, I need to find a smart person, because I fall real low on that curve for that. So I need to go and find someone to translate for me. If I want someone to energetically wave their arms around on camera and talk for long periods of time, I'm pretty high on that curve. I can do that. I'm pretty much nailed that skill now. As much as you can master something, I think I'm there. How valuable that is, I don't know. But Heidi, any thoughts on that? There was a point in there somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah, I just think that if you're collecting that triangulated data too, That's one area where if like a piece of data doesn't show what you wanted it to show, but you have 3 other pieces that do, well, guess what? Share the 3 that do and just keep quiet on the one that doesn't. Like, just because you collect the data doesn't mean you have to share it, right? Like, I know that sounds sneaky and underhanded, but like also if it's an outlier, right? And if you didn't change the thing that you thought you wanted to change, then perhaps it meant that the solution wasn't a right one. And I think, honestly, if I'm being really, really honest, if there's like a piece of honest feedback that I really want to give the entire L&D world, it's that, if the reason that you're not measuring is because you deep down know that training is not the answer, then don't ever agree to that training, because you are just making our entire industry's reputation worse by agreeing to it. And listen, I get that there are outlying situations where it's like, well, I have to do it this way because they won't let me do a different solution. And even though I've pitched to them other solutions, and even though I've, done X, Y, and Z, it's still, it still doesn't make it okay to pursue a solution that is not going to work. Because especially as a leader, as an L&D leader, if you sign your team up for that, you're signing them up to fail. And I have a really huge problem with that as somebody who's led an L&D team, where you deliberately are letting your team fail. I can't respect you as a leader. So if you don't know what the right solution is, you need to learn. And you cannot say yes if it's not a training problem. You have to show them that it's not a training problem. And if you do have to say yes in those rare situations where you're not going to win, like you were talking about earlier, update your resume and get 1 foot out the door. I'm not saying you have to quit with nothing lined up, but I'm saying that if you don't get 1 foot out the door, you become part of the problem. And I'm very, very opinionated about that. Oh, I think you're muted. Are you muted?
I am, sorry. I was dying for a moment, so I muted myself.
Okay.
And forgot. So yeah, I thought, well, it's probably a good point to wrap up. We've only got a few minutes left. Thank you to everyone who's been so active and involved in the comments.
Yeah,
this was obviously a great conversation. Thank you for getting involved. We will obviously be back next month, and we would love to hear from all of you about what topics you would like to see us explore in future live sessions. So do reach out to either of us with your ideas. In the meantime, Heidi, is there anything you want to share with everyone, plug, throw out there, make people aware of for the coming month?
I don't think so at this time. I think I've got not much going on, which is kind of nice.
Fair enough. Well, I'm going to throw stuff out there. So
please do.
Webinars 5 and 6 in the L&D Evolved series are now available for booking on. There is one on podcasting for learning and another on creating videos for the first time if you're new to any of those. So they are completely free. We don't do loads of marketing at Evolve, as those of you who have seen us know. Lots of people don't quite know what it is that we actually do, which proves just how effective I am at marketing our services. Even when they've attended 3 or 4 webinars, they're like, so what do you do? Which is always a good sign, I feel. Do come along. They're going to be great fun. The October ones will be going up next week as well. I think there's one on vibe coding, and there is another on AI adoption and being principle-led when you're bringing in new vendors. So lots of cool stuff coming out. Please do check that out. But other than that, thank you for joining us for this month's ID Update, and we hope to see you next month. Heidi, as always, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.